The argument against those who are concerned is that because expropriation hasn't happened yet, it's not going to happen in the future. But secondly, it has happened already. There has been such cases, and such as the Akkerland story.
When the new Expropriation Act, the Act of General Purpose, was signed off by President Ramaphosa, we were the first to respond. For us, it was terrible news. We said, we have seen this movie before. We've been there. The farmer in this instance realized too late what the risk was and how much he was on his own. Organized agriculture was nowhere to be seen. We need certainty, especially now that we have the new Expropriation Act. Remember, with the changes to the Expropriation Act, although we won the case on Akkerland, we will probably not have won it now. Private property rights is the real cornerstone of the free market system. It's the very foundation of financing, of surety, of collateral. If you don't plan to use it, why pass such an act?
Theo de Jager, thank you very much for joining us on the Pioneer Podcast. It's good to have you here.
And it's always a privilege to have these discussions with you.
So I want to talk with you primarily about the issue of property rights in South Africa when it comes to land, especially land that is owned by farmers. But I want to start with this recent story in the news of a case that SAAI, the institution that you were involved with, won at the Press Ombudsman against News 24 for having published false information or fake news, especially on this topic of land reform and land ownership. So what is the story there?
When the new Expropriation Act, the Act of General Purpose, was signed off by President Ramaphosa, we were the first to respond. For us, it was terrible news. If they want to take somebody's land without compensation, it's our land. We are in the first trench of this battle. And we reminded South Africa in our response of the expropriation of Akkerland. We said, we have seen this movie before. We've been there. And the moment they give you your letter, the moment you receive that envelope, from that moment on, this property is no longer yours and you must vacate. Even though the technical transfer has not yet been done in the deeds office. Mm-hmm. And then such a property owner is delivered. You're on your own. You need to challenge it. It costs a lot of money, which you need to find somewhere because your business, your farm, is no longer yours. You cannot continue farming. And in the case of Akkerland, it was a big issue. It was up in Limpopo, where my farm is also. I was at the time of the expropriation still on the executive committee of Agri Limpopo. This guy was a member of ours, and all the farmers in Limpopo got to an agreement on our WhatsApp group that we must do everything in our power to assist him. Because what if your farm is the next number to be drawn from that? So the first big challenge we had was to find a judge over the Easter weekend to hear an urgent application. They gave the owner only 7 days to remove all these movable assets. But this is a very big game farm. And it's not that easy to move wildlife from such a farm. Apart from everything in the house and everything on the yard. It doesn't take only 7 days to move a farm.
So you think they gave them notice? That's the government?
Yeah, government give this notice in the late afternoon of the Thursday before Good Friday. So of this week they gave him to move all his movable assets, 4 days of that week was a holiday in any way. And now we needed to find a judge. But we found one who heard us on the Saturday in his house. And he said that the owner can remain on the farm until the court could hear the case on the principle. But he also gave us only 2 weeks to make that case. And to do so, we needed some money, which the owner did not have. And also in Agri Limpopo, we did not have it. And we were certain that the mother body, Agri SA, would assist. But when they also decided not to help us because they said this is not completely without compensation, actually the offer on the table was around 20 to 25% of the value of the property. And they felt that it would not be politically correct to challenge this particular expropriation. So we had to find the money elsewhere. I ran to AfriForum and to Solidarity, and Flip Base and Cully Creel, they agreed to come to the table to pick up a part of the bill and to assist us to get access to a loan for the rest. But this matter was only heard in September, or scheduled for September. And then on the stage of the court, we got to an agreement, and this agreement was made in order of the court. They turned over the expropriation. The judge ruled that the ownership of the property must revert back to the original owner. And he gave a cost order against the minister and the Land Claims Commissioner. And then we celebrated, but unfortunately, it meant the end of our careers in the Agri SA substructures. It was the end of the career of the president of Agri Limpopo, Leon Borchitz, who still today serves on the board of SAAI, and of the CEO of Agri Limpopo. And when my 2 friends were kicked out, I also decided to walk out, and that was how we launched SAAI. We said to each other, if any such a thing would happen again, no farmer should wonder where he would get some help. You must be certain that the other farmers will help you. And in a sense, this experience with Akkerland was also what gave birth to SAAI as a network for family farmers. Now, there were 3 things which stood out in this experience. The first was, although so many businesses in the agricultural value chains, especially the banks, although they are very vocal about how safe property rights are, when push comes to shove, they are not there to assist the farmer. Even now, with the new Expropriation Act, it was the CEO of Standard Bank who was the first to say they're not concerned. They will keep on financing farmers like ever before. But it's not really happening on grassroots level. But then come to think of it, very few farmers farm on a cash basis. All of us put our land as collateral, as security for our production loans, and we repeat that every year. So if they would expropriate us at less than market-related compensation. Let's say they expropriate us at 60% of the value of our land. On average, it would mean that the bank and the cooperative would get what the farmers owe them. It's the farmer who would walk out naked. This is why we said in the launching of SAAI, farmers must realize that they are pretty much on their own. We need a structure who's the authentic voice of the farmers and not the voice of agribusiness or banks or cooperatives or the financiers. The second thing which stood out was organized agriculture was nowhere to be seen. Not Agri-SA, not AgBiz. The farmer in this instance realized too late what the risk was and how much he was on his own. So we need certainty, especially now that we have the new Expropriation Act. Remember, with the changes to the Expropriation Act, although we won the case on Akkerland, we will probably not have won it now under the new Act. But the third thing is that the system is really rigged against the individual. The relationship between policymaker and lawmaker and big business is such that the interest of the individual easily gets lost. And when we said this at the signing of the new Expropriation Act, the first institution to lash out at us was News 24. And they did it in a few ways. First, they published this article saying it's not even true that Akkerland was ever expropriated. It was sold on the open market for 80 million, as if the expropriation never happened, and as if the offer under expropriation was not a mere 20 million. And then they even backpedaled on it and later said, although technically it was expropriated, it cannot be compared to the act we have today. What was strange for us is, why would a news agency try to cancel our warnings to our members, soothing them and saying there's nothing to fear? Hence, as SAAI, we came out to say, those who say there's nothing to fear, whether it be the media houses, whether it be the banks, why don't you change your language? Why don't you put your money where your mouth is? Why don't you set up a pool of money saying, should an individual property owner lose in this process, we will cover that loss. No one is prepared to do that. So our message remains, property owner, you are pretty much on your own, and there's only one way to address this. You must join an organization where other farmers, other property owners would stand together, and should your number be the one to come up, you'll know you're not in this fight alone. Had we lost the case of Akkerland, we would probably have seen many more such expropriations.
So this discussion on expropriation without compensation, the public discourse, is to me strange for some reasons, and I'd like to get your view on that. The one is that the argument against those who are concerned is that expropriation hasn't happened yet, so why are you concerned? When the actual concern is with the government trying to get this power to do so. So the fact that the argument seems to be that because something hasn't happened yet, it's not going to happen in the future. But secondly, it has happened already. There has been such cases, and such as the Akkerland story. conveys. So why is it then, if we had to speculate, that we have these people in the media like News 24 and then certain role players, commentators and so forth, who are so committed to conveying the message or telling the public that there isn't a threat of expropriation of property without compensation?
There are two dimensions to your question, Ernst. We have seen this movie before, not only through Akkerland. There's also plaaswerfbeleggings, a property that was leased out to government in Heidelberg, Gauteng, where government stopped paying its rent. They used this property for a mortuary. And then when they stopped paying their rent, the landowner chucked them out through a legal process. And when they lost that case, the state simply expropriated him without compensation. And that case is currently still in court. Hence our fear for the wide powers given to the state, not only on national level, but also second tier in the provinces, also third tier of government in the municipalities. The wide powers of state officials to decide who should be expropriated and at what value, whether there would be any compensation at all. But that's not the only dimension to this question. It is also about what underlies this act. This act is different from the previous one, and it is different to similar acts elsewhere in the world. Every country has an expropriation act. Every country needs an expropriation act. But other countries expropriate for a public purpose, like building a road, expanding a town, building power lines or a railway line. This act also provides for public interest, which is a political thing. Our constitution also identifies land reform as in public interest, the redistribution of wealth. Hence, it takes from somebody to give to someone else on the bill of the individual. And our argument is, in which kind of democracy can you allow the individual to pick up the bill for a national imperative? Why should the individual farmer pay for land reform? It must come from the fiscus. It was not the individual farmer who in the first place created title deeds. And the vast majority of landowners in the agricultural space today acquired their farms after 1994. So if any land had been stolen, and it is this stolen land narrative that's really the driving force behind this Expropriation Act. If any land had been stolen, the state itself, the new government itself, was party to that theft because they received the tax on the transfer duties. And the deeds office is a part of the state. Hence, we firmly believe that the reason why this act was passed and the way it was passed, it's got nothing to do with equality, with development opportunities for the poorer segment of the population. It has everything to do with the ruling party who has lost its grips, its handles on society, and whose only real stronghold is today deep rural areas. Those areas where the quality of education was poorer over the last few decades, and where people can still be persuaded that land is wealth, and by taking somebody's land or receiving somebody else's land will hurl you into the wealthier part of society.
I want to take a moment to thank you for watching and following the content on this channel. And I also want to encourage you to like this video and to subscribe to this channel to ensure that our audience is broadened. So what would your response then be to, if I were to play devil's advocate and say that redistribution of land in South Africa is very important, because simply looking at land ownership patterns, that, as we often hear, white people own 80% of the land in South Africa?
We don't know where the data comes from. Nobody has ever shown that data. To the contrary, in his State of the Nation speech earlier this year, President Ramaphosa, he quoted 75 or 25% of farmland that's already been transferred under land reform. And he quotes it from Agbi's, Wandile Sehlobo and Johan Kirsten's paper on it. And that's only of farmland. Remember, 80% of land in South Africa has never been in the hands of private owners. We've always had the so-called homelands, the traditional areas, all the protection areas, like the Kruger National Park and other national parks. All of those together is a massive chunk of land. And then it would only be somebody who's never involved in agriculture who would come up with such an argument, as if any hectare is comparable to any other hectare. Half of our country is very dry. South Africa as a whole is the third driest country south of the Sahara. It is only Namibia and Botswana which is drier than us. If you simply count the hectares of farmland and say whites own 70% of that, or now a little less, you are comparing a hectare of desert with a hectare of high potential farmland. And where the two of us grew up in the Limpopo Lowveld, 10 hectares can earn you more than 500 hectares of the Karoo. And just about all the land reform happened in the high potential area of South Africa. KwaZulu-Natal, the richer soils, the wetter areas, the Mpumalanga and Limpopo lowvelds, even the highvelds in those two provinces, the Eastern Free State, the whole of the Eastern Cape, that's where land reform happened. Very little of it in the other half, the drier area. It can simply not be true that in terms of wealth creation potential, 1 hectare equals 1 hectare elsewhere.
And now we are given the assurance that the Expropriation Act would not be that dangerous, because partly, as you mentioned, other countries have Expropriation Acts as well. And this new version of the Act has a list of criteria that have to be fulfilled to expropriate private property. So that, especially when it comes to expropriation without compensation. So the claim is that the concern about expropriation without compensation is an exaggeration. Do you think it is an exaggeration, or is there validity in being concerned about this?
The mere fact that they've passed this act is a major source of concern. Farmers and property owners in general don't fall for the argument that they will not use this act. And as you said, it has not happened yet. if you don't plan to use it, why pass such an act? Why scare off any potential investor by having such an act? The other big argument is that this new act falls squarely within the ambit of the Constitution. It might be true, but then we can be maimed within the framework of the Constitution. The Constitution in South Africa does not guarantee market-related compensation. To the contrary, Section 25(3) of the Constitution is very clear that the market value of a property is only one measurement for compensation. And it quotes 5 others, but it also opens it up indefinitely. And those criteria is, for example, the purpose of the expropriation. So the state can take a discount for the purpose. So if the purpose is land claims or land reform, the state can take a discount. Unfortunately, the Constitution does not specify. Is it a 5% discount or a 20% or a 50% or an 80% discount? The history of acquisition, that would justify a discount. The state's historical investment in a property. For example, if a farmer benefited from the 1940s, 1950 Agricultural Credit Board scheme, which made it easier for farmers with softer loans to drill a borehole or to do the fencing around your farm. The state now wants to argue that we've already paid for that fence or that borehole, or at least subsidized it. So they want to deduct the value of that, translate it in today's values. But also, the fact that these criteria is open-ended makes it so much easier to get away from market-related compensation. Now, our problem with that is that we already lost a lot of gearing in agricultural financing. When I started farming 30 years ago, our gearing was well into the 60s, 60%, 65% of the value of your farm you could borrow from the bank. It's much lower today. But farmers have this exposure to the banks, and if the banks know that their interests are covered, they are not going to fight for you. Most farmers do not have a pension fund. Very few of them have. Most farmers had their retirement planning done in a way in which they think they will one day sell their farms, even if it's to their sons. And then with the money they get for it, they would pay their debt, and with what is left, they would retire. And that is what is at stake at the moment in the way the Expropriation Act was formulated.
So the government has made the argument, and people pushing this Expropriation Act, that it is in the public interest to look at what the farmers are doing on their land. And so, for example, if there is a piece of land on a farm that isn't properly used or utilized, then that could form the basis for expropriation. Is that a good argument to say that if a farmer has a piece of land or a part of his land isn't used regularly, that could then be expropriated and given to someone who would be more productive on that piece of land?
It would be very interesting to learn exactly who decides on the productivity of land, because in different commodities, different products you farm, the land use is managed differently. You cannot plant tomatoes on the same land every year. You plant and then you rest it for 4 years. And then you plant again and you rest it for 4 years. And in that 4 years, is that land productive or not? The same with grazing. Many farmers rest some camps, or they fence off a part of the farm and make fire breaks. And should they have a fire on the other side of the farm, they can move their cattle there, or they rotate the cattle between camps. Are those camps productive or not? Who would decide on that? Government says that they want to kill this phenomenon of land-based investment, where people buy land and just let it lay fallow, and then one day they will sell it again because they would benefit from the growth in the value of the land. Now, there is not that much such land in South Africa. Government is also often referring to land in the hands of foreigners. But in 2006, the Department of Land Reform did research in partnership with a few other research institutions and universities, and they themselves found that less than 1% of farmland is in the hands of foreigners. And even of that, more than 85% are in two commodities: wine farms and game farms. The fact that foreigners can invest in land brings a lot of dollars into our system. We had this example in Hoedspruit, where there was a very big mango farm which was owned by a German investor. But the processing plants he has put up on that farm was really amazing. Latest technology of agro-drying, because he exported dried mangoes. An acha factory, juice-making factory. And then, because of the pressure on foreign ownership about 20 years ago, this farmer decided he would rather sell his farm while he can still get a market-related value for it. And he sold it in the land reform process. And the beneficiaries, when they got onto the farm, their business plan was all about just taking over the business and exporting the processed products to Europe. But when the German owner left, he left with his market. They never exported a single kilogram or a single liter of processed mango from that farm again. The German invested because he had the market, and the beneficiaries did not buy the market from him too. And that farm, until today, never got back on its feet again.
Wow, it's incredible. So if we were to, before we close off, if we were to make it practical now, farmers are, for good reason, very concerned about South Africa and about the future, about the safety situation, which we haven't even gotten into, and then, of course, the threats to property rights. So the question is then, what is your advice? What is your advice to farmers? What should they do?
Farmers must make sure that they are part of structures who can collectively face these challenges, because on your own you are delivered. And then go on farming. Don't take your feet off the petrol. If ever there was a time to invest in food production, it is now. We sit on a continent where there's 46% of the world's underutilized land. There's a reason for it. It is in a very few countries in Africa where we have private property rights on farmland. It is here in South Africa and small pieces of Botswana and small chunks of Zambia and Namibia. But in the rest of Africa, because there is no private property rights on farmland, no one invests there. No one puts in infrastructure. Nobody plants trees if you don't know whether you'll be around to harvest from those trees one day. Private property rights is the real cornerstone of the free market system. It's the very foundation of financing, of surety, of collateral. And we do not need to go very far to see what the consequences are when you disrupt property rights. We can just cross the Limpopo River and see what it did in Zimbabwe, also a country which 25 years later still cannot get going again. Its economy is still in tatters. It has its 6th currency since it started to grab property. And no measure of initiative, apart from restoring property rights, could replace that foundation. I will never say that we are on the same trajectory as Zimbabwe, because we have a few things which Zimbabwe never had. We still have a free press. We still have institutions like yours and like AfriForum and like Solidarity. These institutions who can bring weight when you want to scrum back against the threats to property rights. And of course, we still win cases in our courts. The courts has not been fully captured like it is in Zimbabwe. And we must appreciate these assets. These assets is what keeps societies going. Civil society, the ability to take hands outside of the realm of party politics and the state because of shared interests. Our challenge is now to mobilize enough people behind it. And with a lot of grace from above, lately we have more and more foreign interest in what is going on here. We are also being showed the yellow and red cards from other referees than just those who were appointed by the players themselves.
Theo de Jager, thank you very much. Thank you for coming in and sharing your insights with us. It was great to speak with you.
Always a privilege. Thank you.
If you would like to support this channel and the work that we are doing at Lex Libertas to work toward a more sustainable and a more viable political dispensation for South Africa, I would like to encourage you to sign up as a contributor by clicking on the link in the description.